Glen Silksa, good afternoon. Tara Marsden, Naxginkw, Wilp Gamlacheld Winsawid, Lachkaneda Padegi. That means that my name in English is Tara Marsden. My name in Gitsan is Naxginkw, and I'm from Wilp Gamlacheld of the Frog Clan or the Ganeda in Gitanyow. And Gitanyow are Gitsan culturally. And I'm coming today from my home in Wilpsbach territory, which is one of the Gitsan Wilp, and it's also known as Hazelton. And I'm going to be talking to you today about the Gitanyow Wilp Sustainability Assessment Process. And my role has been to help establish this process with the Gitanyow Hereditary Chiefs, where I've worked for 13 years now, and also to implement it. And so this is a parallel Indigenous-led process that parallels the Crown processes, so provincial environmental assessment or a federal impact assessment. And this process has really resulted from a lot of experience in participating in unsatisfactory Crown-led or colonial impact or environmental assessments. And so I'm going to tell you a bit about how we did this and why, and then give you an example at the end. And then we'll have some discussion with Justine. So just to give you a bit of an overview, and the photos that you see throughout are going to be examples from our territory of important places, places that have been stewarded by our Huilp and our hereditary chiefs for millennia and are a part of our unceded territories, or what we call our Lachip. So I'll give you a bit of an intro and background on who the Gitanyow people are, and also how did we end up developing this WILP sustainability assessment process, again, and why. I'll then go through a bit of an overview of the process steps and what it involves. And then I'll give you an example of the WILP sustainability assessment process in action. So the very first project we are reviewing is called the Eskay Creek Mine, and we have concluded this review now and have some key recommendations and are in the final stages of negotiating with the company as well as the Crown to have our assessment recognized and implemented. So, who are the Gitanyow people? We are Somali-speaking Indigenous peoples. And as I mentioned earlier, we are culturally Gitsan. And so we have been politically independent from the larger Gitsan nation for several decades, primarily because of the significant impact of the Nisga'a Final Agreement or the Nisga'a Treaty. So that overlaps about 84% of our territory and really requires a much more dedicated focus from our hereditary chiefs. And so we have been politically independent, but there is no sort of division or separation culturally from the Gitsan people. And Somaliach is a language that is spoken not only by the Gitsan, but by our neighboring nations, the Nisga'a and the Tsimshian. And so we all have different dialects, but we can communicate and understand one another. And it also ties us to them in terms of our very similar governance system. So we have matrilineal membership within a WILP and a clan, and then we have territory tied to WILP and clans as well. And so we are an independent Huilp, as I mentioned, from the Gitsan. And within Gitanyow, there are two Padaik, which are clans. And within each of those Padaik, we have 4 Wilp, and a Wilp is a house group. And so the Gabu is the wolf, and the Ganeta is the frog. And we have maintained this system of membership, of governance, and of title to the land since time immemorial, and despite the incursion of the colonial system of the Indian Act. And so many people will think of bands. And so there is a band called the Gitanyow Band Council, but they operate primarily on reserve, similar to a municipality. So they have never made any claim to the territory, which we refer to as the Lachip. And they operate in terms of a service provider. Again, very similar to a municipality, if you imagine that type of governance, where their jurisdiction is within the reserve and only on behalf of band members. And so a WILP member could also be a band member, but sometimes our WILP members belong to different bands and vice versa. And Some of our Wilt members may live elsewhere, but we still work on their behalf because those are the title holders to the Lachiep. So this is a map of the Lachiep here, and you can see in the insert at the bottom there, roughly where we are in Northwest BC, or what's called British Columbia today. And it's about 6,200 square kilometers. And as I mentioned, it is unceded. So we have never surrendered this territory to any other level of government, to any third party. We do not have a treaty. And we work really trying to maintain that title, so that unextinguished title to the territory. And the way that this is established and really provided to other levels of government to understand, well, whose territory is this, is through a system of place names, Adaw, which is our oral history, and Ayuks, which is our crests. And so when you see totem poles, as you see here in the top right corner, you might think that those are just artwork, but they actually are what is kind of referred to by our people as a deed to the land. So each of those crests has a very specific history, which is again Adaw, oral history, and it describes the migration, the defense of certain territories, and really provides to other WILP and to other clans and to other governments the history of these places and the people tied to them. So there's 8 historic WILP in Gitanyow, as I mentioned, and they each have their own defined territory in the red lines here. And the collective of the 8 WILP territories is what's referred to as the Gitanyow Lachiep. So there's ayuks, which is crests, as I mentioned, that you'd see in artwork on totem poles. And then there's ayok. Ayok is Gitanyow indigenous law. And the ayok for our people really is like any other society that has rules that govern it and how people will get along, how they will organize themselves, how they will interact with their neighbors, how they will pass on knowledge and pass on territory to future generations. So all of that is embedded within our ayok, and we have an oral culture. And so, with the introduction of the written language, we have documented our ayok through the Gitanyow Constitution, and that was ratified by our chiefs in 2009. And it really is just a transparency piece. So again, we're an oral culture, and it's a very different way of remembering and documenting things when you have to do things orally, because it really relies upon a trusting relationship with other chiefs, with other nations, and really to ensure that people are witnessing when you are claiming things or saying things about certain laws, that there's an affirmation of that from other people, so that it isn't one person or one WILP or one clan who has all of the authority. It's a very much of a distributed authority model. So we have modern ayok as well. So I'll give you a bit of an overview of that in the Lachiep Land Use Plan of 2012. And then in 2020, we established the Gitanyow Wilp Sustainability Assessment Process. Also in 2020, we finalized the Gitanyow Water Policy, and we established in 2021 the Wilp Willits Meziadin Indigenous Protected Area. So the historic or the ancestral ayok is really those fundamental legal principles that govern us as a people. And now what we're trying to do is to weave those into modern documents, modern laws and policies of how we interact with colonial systems, how we interact with industry, and how we interact with colonial governments who have interests now in our territory. So the first that I will go over, and this is a part of the WILP sustainability assessment process in that it is a strategic direction. And so when a project comes along and wants to develop within our territory, we have to say, well, how will we understand if this project is beneficial to us or is impactful to us, and how do we make a decision, an informed decision? And so one of the strategic directions, the guiding one for a lot of our decisions, is the land use plan. So this took 10 years for the hereditary chiefs to negotiate with the provincial government. It took 3 court cases to establish a mandate for the provincial government to enter into joint land use planning. This was passed in 2012. And prior to that, the standard line from the provincial government was that First Nations were not going to be involved in land use planning. The very early court cases that came out around consultation in around 2000 in around 1998 and then into the early 2000s really said, well, there is a duty to consult, but it's pretty modest, it's site specific, and it's really just a duty to hear if there are any concerns before they go ahead and make a decision. And so Gitanyow had been under that system for a while, but really we're not seeing the big picture. What does this one individual forestry cut block mean in the context of our entire territory or in the context of this watershed? What are the other cumulative impacts that we should be aware of? What are the thresholds in terms of cumulative impacts that we want to establish and to adhere to? And how do we know that our ecosystems are actually functioning? And so, again, 3 court cases getting a mandate to say we need joint land use planning with the provincial government resulted in this plan in 2012 and has been upheld since then and renewed through our reconciliation agreement with the provincial government. So it's really an expression of Aboriginal title in that Aboriginal title means that you have a right to choose how you use your land or how others use your land. And having a land use plan really defines key zones, which you can see on the map. Zones in some cases where there will be no industrial development, and in some cases where there will be industrial development, but with certain conditions and management targets and direction. And so just a few examples of these zones, they include our ecosystem networks and buffers, and that is our core riparian areas, which are protected and off limits. Also in the light purple is the water management units. So those are the higher elevation catchment areas, which feed down into the lower elevation riparian areas, moose winter range, mountain goat, and others. So overall, with the Gitanyow Lakip land use plan, and now with our Indigenous protected area in the northern part of the territory in the red outline in purple here, we have protected 51% of our territory from industrial development. In the green, these are our operable areas. And so this does not mean that anything goes. It is not a 2-zone system. It's just this map is showing you what is protected versus what is operable. In the operable areas, we still have significant management direction and targets, and you won't see the others in this that were on the previous map that include moose winter range, ecosystem networks, others. And so this is just simply a simplified version of that to show you what has been protected. So our IOC is really based a lot on sustainability. And in our language, what we call it is Gwelchiainst. This is our sustainability principle. And Gwelchiainst means really that we have our right, but we also have, more importantly, our responsibility to the territory and to then pass on the territory in a sustainable manner from one generation to the next. So we are intended to live off of our WILP territories. We are not in our laws supposed to go and trespass and to get access to other people's territories, to get resources from other people's territories. And if our territory is in a degraded state, if it can't produce salmon and moose and mountain goats and grizzlies and plants and medicines, then we are seen as an impoverished WILP. And so it's very important that each WILP territory is maintained in that healthy state that is connected to ecosystem function. So what we have done with the land use plan is to balance both the scientific and these ancestral principles, legal principles of Gwelchiainst. So that's one of our key strategic directions under the WILP sustainability assessment process. So I'm now going to go into why did we develop this? What were the sort of driving factors surrounding the development of our WILP sustainability assessment process? So we already had this land use plan in place. This was the foundation. This is what we built from. But we were applying our land use plan into various assessments, the main one being the Northwest Transmission Line. So this was the very first project, major project that covered a significant amount of land in our territory. This is a power line that goes up north to the mines and supports the mines in Tahltan territory. And that was built and constructed in just very soon after the land use plan was passed, and included a routing around the Hanna-Tottina Conservancy, the establishment of the Hanna-Tottina Conservancy to protect critical salmon habitat. So we also were looking at mines outside of our territory that may have had some incidental impacts to our territory. So the Avanti Kitsault mine had some transportation impacts, as well as KSM, which is a mine in the headwaters of the Nass River. And so that has downstream impacts into Gitanyow territory, which is in the Nass watershed. And we also were in 2014 and 15 looking at the proposed LNG pipelines. So we had been discussing with a number of nations the feasibility of a regional sustainability authority. And so we have good relations with the Gitxsan and the Wet'suwet'en, and really wanted to work based on watersheds, based on the natural boundaries of our region, and not just on administrative boundaries of the provincial government or even our own territorial boundaries. And so this is still a concept, but Gitanyow decided to move ahead and said, we really actually want something that is distinct and parallel to colonial processes. And so we worked with the RELAW program as a part of West Coast Environmental Law, and they assisted us in the development of this. So they really understand the colonial law quite well. And so they knew how to help listen to the chiefs, listen to what we wanted to see in our own process, but then also to say, how will this interact with? Because at the end of the day, we still have to seek some type of alignment between decisions of the Gitanyow and decisions of the colonial governments. So it took a couple of years. It took a lot of drafting meetings. It took a lot of discussion amongst our chiefs. And then once we got to a first draft, we went out to the Crown and said, we're going to pass this. This is going to be our law. And now is your chance to be consulted, to tell us if you have questions or concerns. And the Crown doesn't really know how to respond to that. They're used to being the ones that go out and consult on decisions and on policies and legislation, and so they really don't know how to respond. So they just take information and say, "Okay, well, thank you for that information." So we had a 1-year pilot that was started during the COVID pandemic and really got extended for quite a long time. And the pilot is really just to make sure, as we actually apply this, that we might want to make some changes based on the reality of applying this process and implementing it. So the purpose of the WILP Sustainability Assessment Process, or WSAP, first is to recognize Gitanyow jurisdiction. So if a company wants to participate in this and be reviewed as a project, they have to recognize to some degree that Gitanyow has jurisdiction and authority within our territories. They also have to recognize that Gitanyow has laws, and this is one modern expression of our laws, or our ayok. And it does support reconciliation and ensures that projects will only proceed with what's called Nidinsk. Nidinsk is our version or our translation of consent, or free, prior, and informed consent. And so that is a part of course, the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. It's also to inform WILP decision making. And so the hereditary chiefs are each their head spokesperson for their WILP. And so they are groomed from a young age to assume that position of leadership. And they have to report back to their WILP, and they have to be able to make an informed decision on whether projects are within are in the interests of their WILP, or maybe are not. We want to ensure WILP sustainability for future generations. I talked about the principle of Gwelchjenst. And so if we are making decisions today that are going to deprive our future generations of the health and the benefits of the Lahyp, then we really have not done our job, and we would be bringing a lot of shame to our Wilp and to our clans. We also have a climate test, which is a key part of this. And so, as we were developing this, we were just starting to witness firsthand real climate impacts in our territory. We were witnessing in 2018 and 2019 droughts that we just have never experienced before, wildfires that we, would see maybe once every 20 years, but severity wise, a lot more severe, and in combination with fires in the surrounding area. So just this heightened sense of panic and urgency every single summer, with people being evacuated and people having concerns about fires close to the community. And so people are much more aware now of the real life impacts of climate change. And so we want to ensure that if a project is going ahead within our territory or affecting our rights, that we are ensuring that they are not causing the provincial government or the federal government to not meet those greenhouse gas emission reduction targets that are in law or in international agreement. We want to ensure meaningful Wilp involvement of our people to uphold their UN Declaration rights and their constitutional rights, and to support a transition back to Gitanyow authority. Gitanyow has lost a lot in terms of the experience of colonization. And so the UN Declaration speaks about redress. And redress really means to return things back or to compensate for things that have been lost through the process of colonization. So those are the main purpose and objectives for the process. So this is a diagram just to show you what the process looks like in terms of key steps. And so a project will come along and they will say, well, we're in an investigative stage. We want to maybe explore the potential for, and I'm going to use a hypothetical example for this. We want to explore potential wind power in Gitanyow territory. And so what we'll ask for is an initial description of activities. And so this will outline who the proponent is, what their background is, if they've developed projects like this elsewhere, what the scale of it is, the size, what the potential consistency might be with the Gitanyow land use plan and other strategic direction, which Wilp will be affected, what the timelines are, and what the potential benefits might include, as well as an initial understanding of impacts. So from that initial description of activities, it's an iterative document. We go back and forth with the proponent. Then we have an initial assessment decision and the Wilp Sustainability Assessment Direction. So this is the point where the chiefs say, okay, we've seen this initial overview of the project. We want to review it, yes, or maybe we do not want to review it. Maybe it's just not in our interest to review it at this time. So there's an initial decision to say, yes, we'll review this, and this is the scope, this is the timeline, and this is the fees that are associated with this review. So the scope and the fees then go to support the studies and analysis that will be conducted by the Gitanyow staff and consultants. And then there's an assessment report, which concludes what are the impacts, what are the benefits, does this contribute overall to Wilp sustainability or not? And if there are conditions for Naxginkw, what are those? And if this is wholly inconsistent with the Gitanyow Ayok and strategic direction, then this project may not receive Naxginkw. And so then there's a project decision statement. And if there is a support, consent, or approval, or Naxginkw, we will enter into monitoring compliance agreements. And as you can see at the bottom, the Gitanyow strategic direction, the land use plan and other policies and documents, that's the main guiding force throughout the process. And so we have a series of agreements with the proponent. And at each of these stages, the Crown may or may not be wondering what's going on. Is Gitanyow being consulted properly? They may invite us to participate in the EA, and we may say, this is our own process, we're doing it. And I'll give you an example of that with the Eskay Creek mine in a little bit. So Naxginkw, as I mentioned, just to repeat and remind folks, Naxginkw is that Gitanyow version of consent. And it actually means confirmation, or more like a mutual agreement. And so it isn't a sort of a blanket consent, which many companies want. They want to say, okay, sign here and you get a bunch of money and you give us consent forever. This is the status quo that we're trying to move away from, right? What Naxginkw really means is we have an agreement, and if you uphold your agreement, we will uphold our part of it as well. But if there are things that change, there may be grounds on which we might revoke Naxginkw. That could be a breach of an agreement, or it could be significant changes in the project or in our environment and the health of our territories. Dimdechum Lachip is the ecological integrity, the biological richness of our natural ecosystems, and the Gitanyow caretaking that is involved in keeping our ecosystems healthy. And Amagandadils is our physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual health of our people. And so these are really three kind of pillars of what we want to look for in a project. So to understand if Naxginkw is going to be granted, we first need to understand how does this project affect our Didechum Lahyep as well as our Amagandadils, right? So if this project is going to cause significant impacts with very little benefit, it's not likely that Naxginkw may be granted. So all of this studies and data and analysis gets wrapped up and put through what we call the Wilp Sustainability Test. And so this is very different. This is where we really diverge from colonial processes. So colonial processes say, what is the project? What are the impacts? And are those impacts significant? Are they adverse? Usually they end up not being in the government's eyes. They find most impacts to be not significant and not adverse. And they can be mitigated. And so they're always looking for ways to mitigate and ways to get to yes. Whereas our assessment really looks at among all alternatives. So the alternatives could be the project going ahead as planned, the project going ahead with some major changes or minor changes, or the project not going ahead at all. And there may be other ways to achieve the outcome, whether the outcome is job creation or energy production. So there may be other alternatives that aren't being considered. Usually a project is put forward and it's just sort of take it or leave it, get on board or get left behind. So the Wilp Sustainability Test asks, among these options, which one will make the greatest mutually reinforcing, cumulative, and lasting positive contribution to Wilp sustainability. So again, this has to contribute to Wilp sustainability. It can't just be, well, we've mitigated some of these impacts enough, and we've listened to Gitanyow's concerns enough, so now we're going to proceed, which is, again, the status quo and really unsatisfactory in terms of our participation in previous colonial processes and why we developed this, our own process. So I talked a little bit about the climate aspect of this. And so the climate aspect first says, how does this project either contribute to the provincial and federal governments in meeting their greenhouse gas emission reduction targets or not, right? So that's a very simplified version. But when we started applying that, we found that we wanted to understand more and we wanted to look deeper in terms of some of the claims that companies are making. And so right now, as you may be aware, there are a lot of claims about liquefied natural gas and that this is a bridge fuel to get us away from fossil fuels, but it is also a fossil fuel. There are also claims about critical minerals. And so critical minerals are seen to be very important for energy transition and that they are needed for electric vehicle and other electric machinery in terms of the batteries and other components of that. And so there's a lot of greenwashing that's happening. And so we need to understand when a company says, our project is going to help climate and is going to reduce climate impacts, we need to say, well, is there evidence behind that? And how do we actually analyze that and understand it? And so I mentioned before, we are seeing these climate impacts firsthand in Gitanyow territory. This is not something that is happening elsewhere. I mentioned drought and forest fires. We are also seeing and have tracked and monitored the rate of glacial recession or glacial melting. And so glaciers are critical for the health of our watersheds, especially our salmon watersheds. And so we are seeing glaciers that will be gone. A significant amount of glaciers in our territory will be gone by the end of this century. And so that has um, a real risk if we are participating in projects or supporting projects which are going to, again, cause provincial and federal governments to just blow out their greenhouse gas emission reduction targets. So I'll go into our example. So this is the very first project that we have reviewed. This is the Eskay Creek mine. And so this is a formerly operating mine. And so Gitanyow was never consulted when it first was established. This is outside of our territory. So very clear, this is in Tahltan territory. So our territory ends just north here of the junction between Highway 37, 37A. So you see it going out to Stewart. So our territory ends just around here. So Eskay Creek is in Tahltan territory. And so it's an underground gold silver mine and very high grade ore. And so all we're looking at for this project really is the traffic impacts. So this is like a major industrial corridor because there's so many mines proposed up in this area, and they all need Highway 37 and 37A to get people and materials in and to get ore out. So the project traffic route is seen here on the map. And what we've looked at for this project is the comparison between existing traffic and then what this revitalization of the mine will look like in terms of increased traffic. And so we look at it as both the number of trucks, and then we also look at it in terms of the percentage of the total highway traffic. And so this is a good example because there will be more projects that we review that are similar to this. And so having this as a framework and having this be the first project going through our Wilp Sustainability Assessment process has been a great learning experience for understanding traffic impacts and some of the common mitigations that we would like to see if we end up granting Naxginkw for these projects. So we also, because of the link between traffic and greenhouse gas emissions and the climate test, looked at the emissions of Eskay Creek as a comparison to other mines globally, and then also looked at ways that they could improve. And they do have a lot of ambition around greenhouse gas emission reductions. And they are deemed somewhat of a critical mineral mine. Gold is definitely not a critical mineral, but silver and copper can be. And so they have electrification to support their operation, and they're also exploring electrification of their fleet, so of their industrial vehicles. So in applying our climate test, I won't have time to talk about the details of it. It is a fairly comprehensive test that we have established. But we have 14 criteria that projects are assessed by. And then we have a rating of either good, fair, or poor for each of those, and then an explanation. And so overall, Eskay Creek scored good on 9 out of 13 climate criteria, and scored fair on 4 out of 13, and did not score poor on any of them. So overall, a generally positive outcome. And we have an independent impact assessment expert that we work with. And so we don't really tell him, give them a good rating or give them a poor rating. We really let him be independent and very neutral. And we don't want to influence the outcome of these results, similar to the other assessment aspects like the traffic and others. They really are intended to be scientific and independent, and should not be predetermined in any way. And so other projects that we've run through the climate test have not done as well. So the LNG projects that I mentioned earlier definitely are not receiving similar types of rankings in our climate test. So all of this goes then into our assessment report. And so this was completed in December of last year. It's then presented to the affected WILP and chiefs. And it includes if there is some consistency with the Gitanyow Ayok, there's no flagrant violations. If there's, no, if there is no contribution at all, it's sort of not really a benefit to WILP sustainability, then we might propose some conditions for an adinj which could help to contribute to WILP sustainability. So we're exploring things like the purchase of Gitanyow carbon credits for offsets of any residual emissions that they may have, some guardians monitoring on their traffic, as well as a series of about 7 or 8 traffic mitigations to help reduce wildlife mortality from collisions, which is the main concern that we have with traffic, is our moose population and the high rate of collisions that we see with industrial traffic.